Hey Rebecca, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Excellent. I'm really excited to have this conversation. We're going to be talking about this amazing documentary that we watched the other day on Netflix.
God, yeah.
So powerful, so moving.
It was so
and
mind-blowing.
inspiring. And it's called My Wife, My Abuser. And it's the story of Richard Spencer's ordeal of domestic abuse at the hands of his wife, Sheree, and how it's told in this two-part documentary. It's an incredible watch if you get a chance to see it. And we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about this, sharing some of our ideas, letting you know why you need to be watching it, and giving our take on it. So what were your initial thoughts? What was your overall takeaway from it, first of all?
First of all, it's really... I'm very happy that they've made it public. And so kudos to that guy, to Richard. Because I think society needs to see that the abuser not only is always the man, it can also be the woman, as you can see in this documentary.
That's
what
a
do you
good point.
think?
Well, yeah, if anyone starts watching that documentary with the belief that, look, relationship abuse is always a man abusing a woman, and that's the only way it can be, well, you won't believe that by the end of it, that's for sure. Because what you get to see is like really shocking, powerful, graphic, and it just makes you wonder. So one of the things that jumps out is that Richard has, at some point during this journey of abuse, installed cameras in the house.
Yeah.
So that's what really makes it land so powerfully. And it just makes you wonder how many other people are undergoing that sort of behaviour to some extent, but that they haven't got the technology or the resources or the ability to film it in that
Or
way.
the courage to do that. Because someone who has been so abused for such a long time, 20 years, isn't it? Someone like that could think, oh no, I'm not gonna do anything like that because if she catches me, I'm done. But he had the courage. He did it.
That's a miracle, really, because one of the things you really pick up, one of the most powerful bits, is just how emotionally broken Richard is at the point when this all comes to light. And what actually happens, to give a brief overview, is he shares some of the video footage with a friend.
Yes.
And he shares it not along the lines of, I'm being abused, you need to help me. He shares it along the lines of, well, is this okay? Am I overreacting here? Is this a big deal? Am I making a fuss out of nothing?
That's right.
He says to his friend.
What do you think?
So he's almost at that point of just not even really believing in himself. He's that emotionally broken.
Yeah, I do. We have commented this point in our conversations, Matt, and it's really moving personally because in the past, whenever I was being abused by a family member or an ex-partner, or even at work, really, the first thing I would ask myself is, am I right or am I wrong? I don't want to accuse anyone wrongly. I want to do the right thing because you're a good person. You don't want to accuse anyone and then you are afraid. Well, I was afraid of the reaction. If I accuse someone of something, there may be a reaction because some people don't like to be accused of what they're doing. So self-doubt is a massive thing. And that's what I understand the guy was going through, Richard, when he said, hey, what do you think of this?
Exactly, he's really doubting himself. And just on that point of self-doubt, there's a really powerful bit where he talks about how when this all came to light and Sheree was arrested, he was with his family, and there was a point where his sister was looking at him, and he said that she couldn't look at him without crying.
Yeah.
Just seeing him in such a bad place.
Yeah,
and this just like really speaks to the damage that can be done through these abusive relationships. I also wanted to...
And also, when he was saying that to the camera, to people, he could not even breathe. This is how emotional he gets when he pictures his sister's face, not being able to take it.
That's
he being
right.
abused, her brother.
Yeah.
It is heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And I wonder if we could talk about the different types of abuse.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, when they think about relationship abuse, what they imagine really is physical.
Yeah.
That's the thing that comes to mind.
Fists,
Someone being hit,
banging doors, slamming.
someone being locked up, or or pinned down.
Yeah, bruises.
And bruises everywhere. And the thing is, in the documentary, there is quite a bit of that.
A lot.
There's a lot of physical abuse.
My God, his ear.
It was destroyed. He
His
shows
arm.
his arm covered in bruises.
The knife.
His wife, Sheree, had a tendency to hit him with a wine bottle. This is like a glass with a nice handle, if you like, that she could whack him. And she would beat him for days on end, from what we could see. But yeah, as you say, it escalated not only a wine bottle, which is obviously a heavy object, but also the knife, threatening with a knife as well. So this is one of the types of abuse that quite often comes to mind when we think about relationship abuse. And let's face it, it is abuse, isn't it? To be attacked, to be assaulted, to be beaten is not really what should really sit inside any relationship, particularly a loving relationship. But there's also other types of abuse, aren't there, that come up through the film. It's not only the physical bit, even though that is in a way the most visible. It's not the only type of abuse.
Yeah, well, when you're thinking, as you're saying these words, I know what you want to talk about now, other types of abuse, not just physical, like emotionally, verbally, but I'm actually thinking of a different type of physical abuse. I'm actually remembering what she did to him when he was sleeping, right? And then she comes to defecate, what do you call it, on top of him, and it's just like, and then the guy realizes that, what is this thing that I'm feeling in my head that is dropping, is pouring through me? It's just horrible.
Exactly.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. So he had been at some point sitting on the floor because his wife had said, well, no, I paid for the bed, so you can't sit on it. You sit on the floor. So he was sitting on the floor. She'd gone out to the toilet. But then before he really knew what was happening, she was then, as you say, defecating on him. I would say that is a kind of physical abuse, but it's the kind of ritual it's a ritual humiliation.
Yeah.
It's not physical abuse as in something that gives you a bruise.
But it's disgusting.
Hurts. But of course, it's the act of like deliberately humiliating him.
Yeah.
That's really the point. It's not about hurting him physically. But obviously hitting with a wine bottle will hurt physically.
Yeah.
But this was more like a humiliation ritual of just like saying, look, you're not even worthy to sit on my bed.
Yeah.
Look, you're gonna have to clean up my whatever from your head and from the floor. So it's almost just a way of like belittling him, making him feel small, making him feel unworthy. Like, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of respect. And eventually, just what you see in the documentary is the cumulative effect of that attitude on someone's well-being and their state of mind, which comes through.
I love that word, Matt. Cumulative, what do you say? Cumulative, yeah, because here's what happens. When abuse happens at the beginning, the first time, you get shocked, you don't expect it, so you kind of think, well, everyone can have a bad day and a bad reaction. But then a second time happens, and then you are like, oh, that it doesn't feel good at all. It's like a second warning, a second red flag. It becomes normal. At some point, the abuse becomes normalized, and then you just don't realize. And this is when Richard asks his friend, what do you think of this? And his friend is like, what is this? Like, hello.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think a really important distinction. Sheree is the only one responsible for her behaviour. Sheree, or the abuser in any situation, is the only person responsible for their behaviour. So I wouldn't want anyone listening to think, oh, well, my partner's abused me and that's my fault. No, it's not. If someone's abusing you, it's their fault, 100%. I wanted to say, I think one of the things that was going on there is that the abuse started at a very, very low level.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was maybe the odd comment here, or so it was like very low level at the beginning when they met. Yeah. It wasn't on their very first date that she became like this person.
Exactly.
She started off like a very lovely. I mean, you see her in the nightclub at the beginning, and she looks like really, really nice and sweet.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, there was obviously an escalation that went on during that time. And this might resonate for other people, but like if on the very first date she'd whacked him with a wine bottle, my guess is that he wouldn't still be there. But the fact is that they get committed, they have family and a house, and all of a sudden their lives are intertwined, and that abuse escalates within that context. And the analogy that comes to mind is a saying that says that if a frog is dropped into boiling water, he'll jump straight out. So that would be Richard. Had Richard encountered that abuse on day one, he would have jumped straight out. But the point is that he was in the water, and then the water got gradually heated over years and years and years. And in that phenomenon, that's when it's much more difficult to like feel the temperature rising, because it rises gradually. And I think that's where it can be really hard. Eventually you wake up one day and you just don't recognise yourself. You think, what's this relationship that I'm in? It seemed from the documentary that Richard had the idea that one of his reasons for being there, I think at some point he uses the phrase, well, I couldn't leave because then the kids would just be there with Sheree and she's crazy. So it's like, I've got to stay here at least to give the kids some version of reality or normality. But in reality, it's questionable whether that really worked, whether that strategy was the right one, because they got to see some really horrible things that you wouldn't want any children or any adult even to see, that they got to witness. So but I just want to honour, Richard. He was clearly doing his best.
Yeah, of course.
He wanted to keep things together in whatever way he could.
Yeah.
And in a way, his wake-up call, his breakdown at the end was, well, I just couldn't do it. It was impossible to achieve that.
No. We're always doing our best, don't we? We do our best and the best that we can. And sometimes it is true that a few years ahead we look back and we just scratch our head thinking, why could I have not done anything better? But actually I couldn't, so it's That's okay, right. We do what we can. But it's good to reflect on all these points because Richard has been brave and courageous enough and generous enough to share his story with us. So other people can learn from that if someone resonates with that, which I definitely resonate with that. Not at that level, but I do resonate quite a lot. And I wish I had a pair of cameras in the past and to put them everywhere and share them with the whole world.
Yeah, that's right. It's fascinating, and it does make you wonder how many other people are going through similar or comparable situations where it just hasn't come to light. Richard has done something incredibly courageous. Also, he's used technology in a way that wouldn't have really been possible in the past. That sort of covert surveillance cameras, they're not things that would have been around like 10 or 15, certainly not 20 years ago. So it is really interesting to wonder how many people are going through similar situations and they just haven't been able to expose it in the way that he has on camera. And I want to also talk about how difficult it can be for men to self-identify as the victim of abuse in that way.
It's a good point.
It's what do you think? I mean, society doesn't really make it easy, does it? There's all the stigma around being the victim, and actually Sheree uses some of this in the documentary and says, well, no, if you accuse me of anything, I'm just going to tell them that you were threatening me and you're going to get locked up.
She does.
She's blatant, she's outright, and she's there lying to the police as well in the interview.
Honestly.
But it is interesting, the combination of the stigma of not wanting to be seen as the victim, and also the thought as, well, is anyone going to believe me anyway? Because surely the woman is always the victim here, so how can I be the victim? So no one's going to believe me.
I totally
It makes you wonder how many people are in that dynamic right now.
Yeah, people look so beautifully and perfect and smart and everything together in social media, right? With the life sorted, but then behind the cameras, good luck. And so everyone wants to look, many people wants to look good and put the mask on, pretend that everything is fine, and then it takes courage to be vulnerable and share your truth. It's so inspiring for other people, and also it makes me also think that because he is a man. And most men are taught to not to cry, to not to speak about their feelings, to suppress their feminine side, to not to express their vulnerabilities, their worries, when they feel insecure or unsafe or whatever, they just don't, they're not trained to do that. Actually, they're trained to do the opposite. Many men in society, our families sometimes as well, whichever role models that we grow up with, and for me, it's just so inspiring that Richard has opened up Pandora's box, because I'm sure many people are being inspired by Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Exactly. It could be a bit like the Me Too movement, where people in the entertainment industry came forward and raised their hand and said, look, I've experienced abuse here. And then it opened the floodgates. And I just wonder whether the same thing could happen here, that you could find people watching this documentary or finding out about it and then just saying, well, actually, I'm going through something similar and I need to do something about it. And actually, if he can get the word out and overcome this challenge, then maybe I can as well. So who knows how many people can be inspired by that. But it's also interesting, there were like charities around like relationship abuse, and sometimes they're really explicitly focused on women. It's like, this is for women experiencing abuse, and that's completely okay, by the way, too, because there are many women that do experience all kinds of abuse. But you can't really watch this documentary and think that the only people on the receiving end are women. So if the women that are on the receiving end of this have got support available, charities, helplines, refuges, why don't we have the same for men? Why should we, because of our gender, we not have access to the same support that is out there for women?
I would say that the law protects the woman. And so, because many people think that the man is the abuser. Yes, I get it, testosterone and all that, but what if, how many women are full of testosterone, and actually beyond testosterone, full of anger, resentment, and insecurities and traumas and a lot of stuff that are just trying to heal through their partners, and it just becomes a mess.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking of those kids as well. That's the thing. So therapy is required for those little girls, and good luck to them. They were super lovely and they conflicted. Do you remember in the documentary? They were conflicted between their father and their mother. Can you explain that thing that you told me, Matt, when they were asking their father, Richard, to not to take it personally when they took sides with their mom, but just remember that they still love him. They were just protecting themselves, surviving. And then when the mother would go away, they would go to daddy to hug them. Do you remember that? You told me that.
Exactly.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so Sheree would use the children and try and draw them into the argument, like on her side. Like, oh, we don't like daddy. We're going to get rid of daddy. Daddy's a loser. And like bringing the kids in on her side, like almost like lining them up in support of her. Mm-hmm. And what they realised, the girls, it was really fascinating. They realised the dynamic and they would go along with their mum to stay safe.
Yeah.
But then when her mum would go away, they would go to their dad and basically say, Dad, we're here with you. We're just going along with this, but we really love you.
Oh,
so they were really caught in the middle in a horrible conflict that you'd never ever want children to have to navigate. But that was the challenge. I wanted to ask, what do you think would be like the warning signs? Like there was a time when
it was
their relationship flipped from like quite a nice one at the beginning. Mm-hmm. They showed them on their honeymoon. They got married. Things were relatively good.
Yeah.
And then things weren't anymore. But there was obviously an intervening period where things started to unravel.
Yeah.
What would you say like the warning signs?
That
this relationship is not heading in a good place.
Yeah, I can't remember specifically, but I do remember that there were comments that she started to make to him, and most importantly, not just the words of abuse, but also the tonality of voice. The tonality of voice, the look in her eyes towards him, like with an attitude of contempt, and like if he was a despicable person. And that to me is not love. And I don't care how loving she's been so far. This is a red sign. Is that the person that you are with? Is that the person that is going to touch you tonight? Is that love? Maybe it just doesn't make sense, but the feeling that you get, it's already a red flag. It to me it's just it's something to put in quarantine, and maybe wait for the second thing, then it backs up your belief and you don't wait for a third time. I don't know, but I get it. Having kids, mortgages, stuff, it gets all entangled and complicated, and it's not an excuse. Don't allow that, because your mind is gonna, at the end, you're just going to, your conscious mind is just gonna sit back. You're not the person that you were, and you don't even recognize yourself, and it's just a mess.
That's a great point, exactly. And it's so encouraging. This documentary has started to get lots of attention. It's in the top 10 list on Netflix. There's been lots of articles and comments online. So it's so encouraging that this conversation is out there and happening, and people are thinking about these questions. So yeah, massive well done to the people that made the documentary, and Richard particularly for coming forward, also the police for having supported him so well.
Yeah. What would you do, Matt? What would you do if you see that your brother or your sister, if you have sister, is going through this abuse? Or your children, in the future with their partners? What would you do? Would you allow that? Would you just go to the police? Would you go to the social services? Would you just say, well, that's none of my business? What would you do? I know what I would do.
Yeah, it's quite challenging, isn't it? Where if people are not looking for help, it's quite hard to impose help on people from the outside when they're not looking for help. Because there are probably people with that kind of dynamic where they're like, well, that's okay, that's just our relationship, and they're okay with that. Where there are children around and the children are in danger, that's like another level of risk. But where it's adults in a relationship, it's very easy for us to look through their front window and say, that's not a healthy relationship, and therefore I'm going to go and help them. But that's not really the correct boundary. People need to want help, and they've got to recognize that something is not right.
And you become their enemy because you're making their business your business.
Exactly. Well, imagine if they leave and they have like a big financial problem because they break up, and then they could be blaming you and saying, well, I'm only in this situation because you intervened and got into my business. So really,
it's complicated. Nicky Campbell would say. Nicky Campbell.
Exactly.
It's complicated.
So I think what we can do is like be as a friend is to be listening to people, to be available, to give people some perspective if they ask for it.
If they don't ask for it,
if they don't ask for it, it's quite challenging. Yeah, it's challenging. I'd be curious to find out, other people's opinion, maybe in the comments. Like, would you advise somebody if you saw something unhealthy that you thought, that's not really great dynamic? Would you raise that to people, or would you wait for them to ask the question or express a challenge or something?
Yeah, definitely. If there are kids involved, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, and actually, if you're aware that somebody is about to get hurt or someone is in physical danger, then you've actually, as therapists, we've got like a legal requirement then to make that known. But that's really the only case. Just because people aren't getting along, they may be okay with things. So it depends.
I'm also wondering, I told you this the other day, what is going to happen after 4 years when this woman comes out of jail? What is going to happen?
Does she get the kids back? Does she?
Yeah, because she how much she cares about those kids, I don't know. It depends on what she understands by caring, by love. It depends what the word love means for her. Because whether she genuinely loves them or not, we could also say that some people would feel that those kids are hers, and because they are hers, she wants them with her. She's the mother, so whether she loves them or not, or how she loves them, maybe she wants them with her. And I don't really know what's going to happen.
So this is where social services have got something to say, because there are plenty of people out there who have got children that the state or social services have decided that is not a fit person to look after a child. Where that happens, children get taken away. So it could be that in light of this documentary, the evidence, the conviction, social services might well decide, no, this isn't a fit person to be looking after children. But without being a social worker, I don't know how they assess that. You know, whether this conviction on its own is enough, or whether they need to do some further assessment. From what we've seen, it's really hard to watch that and imagine that woman could be left responsible for those children. But that's a decision for the authorities.
There's another, and I agree with that. Another point I remember at the end of the documentary, he's looking at the pictures, the what you call that book, the album of pictures.
Family photo album.
Photo album, family, and he's saying that he wishes her the best. That to me is really gracious. He didn't disgrace himself. He didn't put himself at the same level of disgrace that she put herself. He didn't become an abuser. He didn't say, I hate her or I wish she dies or in jail or anything like that. He's just gracious. That to me is really amazing. And he kept his dignity. Also, it makes me think how detached emotionally he has become from an abusive partner, from her specifically. I also, to be honest, wish the best to her as well. I don't know what jail is gonna do to her to help her. I also don't know whether she's open to help. But I hope those 4 years are productive enough for her to reflect and change as a person, as a mother, as a partner, and as a citizen. And I don't know, Matt. I don't know how jail can help people to change.
I think it does all the time. Yeah, it depends on the individual. It depends on the individual. Some people have massive turnarounds in jail. It just depends on where people are at. Some people don't change at all. They just get back into the cycle. I really wish her well. I mean, she's obviously got to pay the price for her behaviour, but I also really hope that she does have a wake-up call about the kind of person that she wants to be and how she wants to show up in the future, because this doesn't have to be the end of her life. You know, we're in a society that does give people a second chance. Whether that's a second chance with Richard is another matter, but at least a second chance in life to rebuild. And I really hope she does that in whatever way and makes something meaningful out of her life.
And also I'm proud of him because he did something. Exactly. And now he's sharing it with us, so with everyone. So he's inspiring people.
It's an incredible story. I'd love to get him on the podcast. Maybe that's our task.
Yes.
To see if we could get Richard on the podcast with us. That'd be great. But until then, maybe that's a good time to leave it for today. I've enjoyed it. And well, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.